Hello, my name is Sadeghipour. I am currently a hacker, pen tester, bug bounty hunter, researcher, whatever you want to call it. I work at HackerOne as the Hacker Operations Lead. I've also co-founded a community named Bug Bounty Forum where we curate content for people that are new to the bug bounty scene. And I've found over 600 vulnerabilities on 90 plus companies on HackerOne, including Airbnb, Yahoo, Snapchat, Department of Defense, Valve, and a bunch more. So today I want to talk about Recon. I call it its little things. It's an addition of a talk that I've originally done last year that I built upon in the last year again. And we're going to talk about little things that add up and come up with vulnerability eventually. So why do I do it? Mostly it's for self-improvement. I wanted a way to find something that I'm passionate about that's going to build my career, which at 100% my entire career has been built on bug bounties, through networking with companies that I've worked with, meeting the engineers on the other side, and then eventually getting hired at HackerOne. And I've also get to work with cool hackers like the team on the right or on the left for you guys. And I also like the competition. So my buddy and I, we compete on a daily basis when we talk crap to each other. So every time I let him pass me, he posts a tweet, and then eventually on the next day when I pass him, I post another one right back. So that's what kind of keeps me going. And also, who doesn't like to make extra cash? So the good thing about bug bounties, if you guys aren't familiar with bug bounties, you can sign up on any of the platforms. There's no contract, there's nothing, you just sign up, you find a program that you want to work with, you find vulnerabilities, and you submit it to them, and if they offer cash, you get paid through our platform. Facebook and Google also do their own, PayPal does their own as well. There are other platforms, but I have focused on HackerOne mostly because they have the higher range payments, and they also have a lot more targets than I can hack on. So Recon. The definition of Recon from a military perspective is figuring out what's out there that's not controlled by your friendly forces. But as a hacker, to me, it's understanding how the application works, what it's being used to build that application, finding all the possible entry points, whether that's all the IP addresses, all the subdomains, all the acquisitions, and everything that pretty much they own. And it's also finding all those files and folders that are left behind by developers. And I think I agree with this tweet. This is one of our hackers on HackerOne. A lot of us spend a lot of time doing Recon just because we have a passion for it, and it's also a lot more fun than just sitting at the same application for the whole day. So to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what we're going to talk about, this would be pretty much our roadmap for the entire talk. As we go through each category, I'll highlight them, we'll talk about it, and we'll keep on moving on. And at some point, we're also going to talk about how we can do all this automated so you don't have to do it manually one by one. Everything I put up here, it's either on my Twitter, GitHub, so you don't have to worry about taking pictures. If you want to go for it, I don't mind. But if you want to focus on the material, they'll all be on my GitHub. It's how they get published. So asset discovery is the first step of understanding what a company is all about. So for this portion of the talk, we're going to talk about how we find more subdomains by doing brute force, and we're talking about certificate transparency. So asset discovery is, again, there's a bunch of tools out there. You can download any of them. You can do all of them if you like, and you feed it a directory, a text file that has all these words and keywords and supplements that have been created by somebody else. And you give it a domain name, it finds that all those supplements that exist and gives you a list of them. What you do next is if you find a development or a staging environment, you go after that entire subdomain and you find all the supplements that are behind it. But all that stuff is boring. You can't find everything that's out there. If something has random characters in it, numbers, the company name, the team name, you're never going to find those with brute forcing unless you have a 4 million line text file and you're doing some really cool stuff with it. So I wanted to avoid going the brute forcing method for subdomain brute forcing to find those subdomains by using certificate transparency. If you're not familiar with certificate transparency, there are a ton of databases out there. You can pretty much see every certificate that's been issued to a company by searching for it. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. The first one that I always look at, that I enjoy using before they started charging people for it, was Census. Now it's like $1,000 a month for an API, and I don't feel like donating $1,000 for an API key, but with the limited search that it gives you, you can find a ton of good stuff. So as I mentioned earlier, you can't find something that says Snapchat-payments-gateway with brute forcing, because there's no way you have the word Snapchat in your word list, and then all those other things dashed out next to it. So this is when the certificate transparency becomes a little bit easier to do. It takes less time to go through the databases and looking for them, rather than building a tool that does all that for you. The other one is Shodan. If you're a student, you can get a free membership apparently. I totally missed it as a college student, wish I knew. But if you don't have a college, you're not in college, you can buy one for 40 bucks. And it's probably one of the best investments you can do as a hacker. At least for me, that was one of the best investments. The good thing about Shodan is you can pretty much filter through the data by a lot of different filters. One of them being SSL, so you can also look up all the certificates. You can do them by port number, host name, organization. You can combine all of those, and you will find different results, which we'll talk about examples at the end of this as well. SearchSpotter is a very, very good tool. Pretty much it's the same thing. I use SearchSpotter a lot just because of the fact that it's a really cool API. If you go to the website by itself, it gives you this blob of JSON, but if you clean it up with a little bit of one-liners with JQ, which we'll show you guys in a little bit as well, you can get a pretty good list given to you out on the right. And the other one, alternative, I also combine them both, is cert.sh. The good thing about cert.sh is you can use a wildcard, so you can put that before or after it. And as you can see, it's finding anything that has the keyword Uber, and it's looking for all those different domains.com, .training.net. So there's different methods you can do. SearchSpotter doesn't actually support the wildcard, which makes it a little bit difficult to find other domains that are maybe not .com, like Uber.com. So using cert.sh has been very powerful. You also have a really cool API, and also gives you JSON and XML format as well. The next one is using open source intelligence. So this is where the search transparency stuff kind of falls under the same category, but because of the sake of just looking for subdomains, I want to categorize it with the subdomain findings. So the other two things to look for are IP addresses. So you can go to ANYCon. There we go. For most big companies like Google, Yahoo, Facebook, they have all their acquisitions automatically pulled into their scope within 6 months of being acquired. So as a hacker, knowing that what company was acquired by them when is really powerful. So you can go to Crunchbase, you put in the company name. So for this one, I'm looking for all the Yahoo-owned companies, and you can see a list of all their assets that are in scope. So that alone gives you another list of domains that you could do the last steps to and find all those other subdomains, so you have a bigger attack vector. You can also go on ANYCon, so you can actually look up a company and look at all the IP addresses that they own. So for this one, you go, I went to ANYCon, typed in Yahoo, it brings up this chart, you click on the organization, and you go to the related networks, and it gives you a list of IP addresses that you can run Nmap, and then all the other content discovery things that we'll talk about next. Also, Shodan is a thing. You can just go org is Yahoo, and it'll give you a bunch of them, but it comes down to what you're trying to accomplish and how fast you need the data to come through. So content discovery is where all the fun begins. So you have all these IP addresses, all these acquisitions, all their subdomains. What do you do next? So you start looking at, for me, it's having a first glance at everything. So at one point, I want to be able to just see what is this site hosting. So the first thing I do is grab a screenshot. Then I do a little port scanning. I don't do all the port numbers. I just do select port numbers that I think are common. So I think it's about 20, 30 of them. Then I do a directory brute force, and then I get into the JavaScript files, which we'll talk about next. So again, port scan, screenshot, look for all these different files. These are the list of common IPs that I use. You can add to them, and you can take some of them out. Depends on how fast you want to go. I use web screenshot and pipe for all the screenshots that I take. And then using any of the tools on the right-hand side, you can directly brute force. I personally use directory search, and we'll talk about that next. Also, check out your robots.txt. There's been plenty of times when I'm looking for an admin folder, and it's always just sitting in the robots.txt. Don't know why you're going to give me an admin panel that's really weirdly named, but then put in your robots.txt. That defeats the purpose. But always check that out. It always helps. Also, always keep your archive for all your directory brute force. So the best part about directory search is that every time you run this tool, it puts a report of all the files that it's found, and it reports directory. So what you can do next is, if you find a JMX console for JBoss that's vulnerable on one subdomain, and you have done 400 subdomains directory brute force already, you can do a grep through all your results and see how many of them are vulnerable. So you can see I have 172 of them. Some of those are false positives. You also see that I have 9 that gave me 401, so that means they're behind a password protected folder, which 9 out of 10 times indicates that there is some sort of a login method bypass, and I want to say like half of the times that I've tried, admin has been my best friend. It's worked. You laugh now, but you will see it later. Automation. So all these cool methods all work, but if you're going against a company like Yahoo and they have 40 acquisitions and 4,000 supplements on just Yahoo.com, running directory brute force on every single one of those one by one gets a little annoying and a little boring. So we'll start with one step at a time. So the first thing that I want to look for is all the AWS instances. I think we have been sick and tired of hearing that every big company or government branch has been breached because they had a misconfigured S3 bucket. So why not look for those? You can do that by doing Google or going on GitHub. Those are my go-to. If you go on Google, you can find a lot more sources. And GitHub is who doesn't commit their code to GitHub, right? So those are the two that I usually look at. So that's what it looks like for GitHub on the left. I found 14,000 results. Some of those may not even be owned by Uber, but it's good to look at them and see which ones are and what kind of data they're holding if you have access to it. On the right side is just doing an S3 bucket on Amazon, AWS.com, and then giving it a keyword like Uber or whatever other company you're hacking. There's also tools. So this one is called Lazy S3. This is actually written by me and a friend named Robert Abma. What it does is you give it a company name. For this one, I put in test. And we have given it a lot of different environments and permutations, but it looks for like test keyword and puts in different areas. So for this one, you can't really see it, but it's putting test-admin.staging, test-admin.prod, and then they put test prod admin. It goes all the different permutations and development stages. So we want to make sure we cover every single possible path. There's also another tool called SP Bucketeer. This is also written by a friend of mine named Tom Dev. It does the exact same thing. This was originally his idea. He did it in Bash, but he was lacking a lot of different patterns. So we did it in S3, and we did it in Ruby, and we give him the same exact pattern, so we have both of those working. I use both. I usually use the one on the right more, even though I wrote the one on the left. And that's mostly because if I don't have Ruby installed somewhere, Bash is the easiest one to do. Both of these require to have a AWS configuration file set up on the box. But once you set that up and give it your AWS S3 keys in your own configuration, it uses that to look for all these different assets. So we talked about S3, we talked about SearchSpotter, and we didn't talk about how we can automate it. So the majority of everything that I do is written in Bash, and that's because I'm using different tools in different languages, and the easiest way to run them all, whether it's in Ruby, Rust, Python, Go, Bash becomes a lot easier. It's a little bit messy, but it gets the job done. So the first thing is you wanted to pull data from SearchSpotter. So the first thing I do is I pull all the domains that are given by SearchSpotter. I look for the DNS name with JQ. I clean up the data that's given to me, and I do a grep just to make sure it's not giving me certificates that belong to another company. And I print out that data into a folder for the company name, into the company.txt file. So all those $1 signs are the user. So you want to do a directory brute force, same thing. You create an alias. You tell it to read the file that you wrote in the last step. You read each line, you feed it to directory, search, give it the extensions you want, and the URL that you're giving it is the lines that are in your text file already. And then you want to do screenshot, same thing. I'm just using exactly the syntax that's given to the README file and just dumping it in an alias, so I don't have to type that entire line every time I want to run this tool. I just type in screenshot, directory brute force, or SearchSpotter, and give it my input, so I don't have to again write 2 lines or 1 line. It could get really annoying and takes a lot of time when you're writing it. And if you want to make it even better, you throw it all into one alias and say, hey, when I give you this recon alias, you run through all these 3 again, and you just give me the results. Which brings me to my next tool called Lazy Recon. So Lazy Recon does the same thing in addition to other tools. It does nmap, it grabs the headers for the site, it also does dig, host, and it generates a very cool report, which I'll show you guys after this one. So as soon as I type in, nest.com, laserrecon nest.com, it uses all these different sources and tools to generate a list of domains. The next step, it starts looking at which ones are reachable and which ones are not reachable. So it's pretty much printing out every site that we can access with the curl and everything else that's not accessible. And we want to have those, I keep all the logs of every time I've run these scans just to see which one has gone from unreachable to reachable later on. And you can diff the two. And sometimes there's a lot of them. So this one, I wanted to take a picture of it, taking screenshots, but 73,000 URLs wasn't fun. And I really didn't want to wait all night for this to be done. But just to show you guys what it looks like, this is the report at the end that it gives you with the host name. On the left side, it shows you the directory search. On the right-hand side, I take two screenshots, one from 443 and one from 80. If you're wondering why, sometimes I've seen companies serve different content on different ports, and I realize I'm missing a little bit of weird stuff. I don't know, you can ask, I don't know why they do that, but it's been helpful to have the screenshots there. It's just an extra image, so I don't miss anything. And it generates this report for every supplement that was reachable, and it's been able to run these different tools on. So having this visually available to me is a huge asset, so I don't have to manually click on everything to see what it does. Digital dumpster diving. Anyone here ever do the dumpster diving thing? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So I do this digitally now. Instead of going to a company and looking for all those stickers and everything that has a password and username on it, you can do it all online because people are doing it nowadays. And I'm a pro at it, by the way. I've been doing this professionally for a while. So what do? You want to look for the credentials, right? You want to find the easiest entry point without having to brute force for it. You want to look for authorization headers. You want to look for API tokens. Surprisingly, you can find a lot of them for different companies. So we can do all of these with tools. So this one I think is from Trufflehawk. I honestly don't use any of these tools just because of the fact that I like to really jump into the whole dumpster diving thing and reading every file, because sometimes maybe I don't find a password in that file that I wanted to, but there's some subdomain or an endpoint that I would have missed if I didn't open the file manually. And a lot of false positives would come through from these tools. Not that they're not great, but it's just a personal preference for me to go through them manually, unless I want to go at a bigger scale, then the tools come in. So there's a lot of different patterns you can look for. So if you go on github.com, you can first start with company.com and then give it the keyword dev. So if you want to find more subdomains, you want to find credentials that are for developers, the staging site, whatever that is. And then you can also use, there's a lot more keywords than the ones on the right, but those are the ones that I see happening a lot more than anything else. The best one that I found so far was the ex-PayPal key, where I got access to a company's entire financial account on PayPal, and that was because they accidentally submitted their entire code base to GitHub, and there I was a day later looking at it, and I could pretty much make transactions using the PayPal API. People don't think about these kinds of things. To some of the developers, it's who cares? Who's going to use my developer key, right? I am, because I'm going to get paid for it. So there's another tool out there that a lot of people don't use. It's archive.org. Anyone here watch Mr. Robot? So this is, I think, from the last season where they gave Agent Mobley and they tell him how they found his flyer on the Wayback Machine. And we do the same thing. We go through Wayback Machine, which is archive.org. You can give it a website. For this one, I'm giving hackerone.com. And it will give you all the versions of that site with all the different dates. So on this image, I have 2014 highlighted. And what it does is it pulls up the 2014 version of the site, and you can right-click and pull up all the JavaScript files and see all the old endpoints that may or may not have still been left behind. So you code review pretty much all the JavaScript files, you find interesting new and old endpoints, and you exploit them. But why does a JavaScript file matter? Again, the endpoints are the best part, but there's been times when I see cloud instances that have their credentials hard-coded in a JavaScript file, and those alone are really valuable because you can just get access to multiple instances instead of just one, and then a lot of more bugs come out of that eventually by its own. So this brings up to my next tool, which is called JS Parser. So what JS Parser does is you give it a text file or a JavaScript file, and you can feed it 1 to 100 text files or JavaScript files, and it would highlight all the endpoints that it finds. So you don't have to manually dig through all of those, especially when they're not in the nicest form possible. So you use JS parser, it gives you all the ones that you need, depending on how many files you give it. Then you start fuzzing the API or whatever that site is doing. The next dumpster diving that I like to do is Trello. Don't be this person. All you do is you go on Google, your site is Trello.com, and you give it a keyword. You can give it FTP, you can give it an organization name. And as you can see, there's a lot of juicy data people are just posting to Trello boards without making it organizational, accessible only. So everybody in the world could see these Trello boards, and you can find some really weird stuff. This company did it completely wrong because they not only have given me the FTP password, their WordPress password, their host name, all the PHP admin info, they're also given their GoDaddy account password and PIN number. So you could do a lot more with the GoDaddy account than you can do with the FTP. So these are the things that you can look for. Trello isn't the only place. There's all these different paste-in sites that you can go to, and people just share their quote-unquote notes that are really helpful to us. So let's talk about examples. I'm going a little bit faster than expected, but the examples are where it gets really, really fun. So examples are just looking at certificate transparency sites. There were two instances in different times that I just put in the host name and gave it a port for RabbitMQ. And sure enough, it brought up the RabbitMQ, and the passwords for the default credentials actually worked. So it got me in, and that went in a pretty nice bounty. The next one was looking for Jenkins. So most Jenkins instances are supposed to be internally accessible, but sometimes the domain or the host name may not be accessible directly, but if you get the IP address for it, it's an entire different game. For this case, I just put in host name, dashboard Jenkins, it popped up an instance, I clicked on it, there was no authentication required at all. I clicked around and there was all the build info, including S3 keys and a lot of other information that I could have used as an attacker. The other one is Census. Not too long ago, I actually got a Jenkins instance, access to a Jenkins instance of Snapchat. This was honestly maybe 20 minutes of work. Went to Census, popped in the corporate domain, which you have to look for. I can't tell you what it is, but if you do a little search on HackerOne, you can definitely find it. It ends in corp, so it gives it away. Yeah, so the funny thing about this one was, when you go to it, it just prompted me with the Google authentication. And I just happened to accidentally click on my Gmail, and I accidentally happened to log into it because they forgot to just make it their organization alone and nobody from the outside. And if you have access to Jenkins and the Groovy scripts is available, then it's pretty much GG for you. You can just go in there and run any scripts. For this one, I'm just having to type in testing for RCE, but obviously you could do a lot more like read files, pivot, or whatever else you want to do. But because it's a bug bounty and we don't want to piss Snapchat off, we don't want to piss anybody off with doing bug bounties, there's a point where you stop, and this was my stopping point after just showing him that I can actually execute arbitrary command. Discovering endpoints that were hidden in JavaScript files. So this is actually one of my favorite vulns. Big shout out goes to my buddy Zayat. So example of using JS parser. So we found this JavaScript file within one of the pages that was supposed to just send you a link to download the application. So you put in your phone number and it sends you a link. So we found out what the two endpoints are. So it was airbnb.com/API/v2, and then those two endpoints. So there was some prerequisite. For one of them, you had to have your phone number in your profile, and then the SMS, it allowed you to use the API to send yourself a text message. But there is a limitation on SMS when you can only use 160 characters, and you can't get a lot of data out of a website with 160 characters. And you also have the limitation of making a handful of requests per hour per minute. So that was kind of boring, but we'll come back to it later. There's another one that was the push notifications. So the push notifications, if you're not familiar with, it's those notifications that you get on your phone, on your games. It's always reminding you to go to the game or whatever else you're doing. This one also requires you to have the Airbnb app installed. Your phone verification had to be done, and you had to be logged in. The best part about this was there was no character limitation because it's a push notification, and we had no throttling on our endpoint. So we can send as many requests as we want, and fuzzing this was the easiest thing to do when we don't have a limit. So we figured out, based on the JavaScript file, we figured out that there is a request that kind of looks similar to this one. The two things that got our attention were the user ID and the object ID. And if you send it an invalid template, this is what I love about Airbnb. it gives you an error and it tells you exactly what you need. It tells you, hey, I need a template from you, and I need it to be one of these. So we did it to both. We gave it just X, A, whatever it is. It's something invalid. And he gave us all the templates that it has. So we can pretty much do a lot of these templates sent to our own account from. So what we decided to do was, okay, my user ID is that one. What happens if I just send myself a test with the body of the title being test and the body of it being a test as well? And boom, sure enough, that popped up on my buddy's phone. So we figured that we can send arbitrary notifications. But that's kind of boring. I mean, yeah, I can do phishing, I could send random messages, but it's even better if you can actually enumerate those user IDs and their object ID and be able to pull out reservation information. And that made it a little bit more fun when we started receiving random notifications on our phone and getting text messages that had information that did not belong to us and was for our other account that we were using, and it gave us that information on our secondary account. So this by itself was a $9,000 bounty. It took us a good 6 hours to figure it out because we were getting tired of reading JavaScript files, but eventually Brett pulled through, Zai pulled through, and we were able to figure it out. So let's go back to the dumpster diving thing. One of the findings that I usually do is most of these companies aren't by themselves. So example, Google now has Alphabet. You want to look for those umbrella company first before you focus on the acquisition of what we call it. So I looked up the umbrella company, just called Umbrella. And I combined that umbrella company with the asset name. So example, if I'm doing Nest.com, Nest is owned by Google, before it was Alphabet. And I went on GitHub and I just combined those two. And one of the things that was submitted about 20 or so days ago was an FTP password that had some really interesting data. It gave me access to the entire central FTP server, and it also landed me a 10K bounty. So that was really fun. That one was right after Christmas. That was right after Christmas, before New Year's, so I finished last year with a big bang and got into the next year. So that was a lot of drinks and a lot of fun stuff. Right? So there's a lot more than just FTP for that company, right? Some companies don't have a lot of information on their whatever credentials you find, but the key is that what's the next step? For a lot of bug bounty hunters, we don't know what the next step is, so we have to trust the company that's going to do their investigation, or in some cases, they tell you to go to the investigation for them. So for this one, I've done this to this company in particular a bunch of times. I'm sorry if you guys are watching. But a lot of times I just put in their company name, site.com, FTP, look at the recently indexed files, and you find a lot of really cool stuff. So I've gone anywhere from FTP, the PayPal one that we talked about. I've also found an instance where it gave me the AWS key, and then in the AWS instance that they were using was a configuration file for another database where you connect it to, and you can just create yourself a user account for all the tests that were using that database, and it just escalated a lot more. Unfortunately for me, that company didn't see a lot of value in that. They gave me $450. By the end of the day, that was also $450 for maybe an hour of work. So the ROI on that was great, can't complain. But again, it all comes down to company size and what that asset is holding. And the other thing about this one is this was a internal development site. But what they missed was it had all their employees' credentials. It was encrypted, but as a malicious actor, I don't care if it's encrypted. I'm going to spend days after days after days to figure out these credentials if I really want to breach this company. But yeah, these were the 4 highlights that I found with just doing dumpster diving. There's also all those instances of S3 that we just talked about. Again, I think Verizon was one of the targets. I think the military was a target again. A lot of companies, it's not intentional, but people forget that they need to put permissions on these things. So this was actually sent to us at HackerOne. Peter Jaworski, who is one of our really great hackers, and he's also an engineer at Shopify now. He sent us this really weird report, and it's like, hey, so I found this S3 bucket that belongs to you guys, and I was pretty much able to go use the CLI for AWS and pretty much list every file that's on there. So that's the AWS S3. It's a CLI syntax for it, give it a bucket name, and it pretty much prints every file that's on that bucket. But it's even worse when you can write to the bucket. You can do more than just reading, right? You can rewrite files, you can fish people, whatever your end goal is. So that was a really fun one, and that landed him $2,500 There's also times when people create these C names, they point them through S3, but they forget to go claim it on their account. And we see this a lot on HackerOne. So look for those. So if you see a supplement comes back, it's pointing to a AWS instance, always check it out. That's why I take screenshots, because if I take a screenshot, the first thing I see is the AWS error that says no such bucket, then I know I gotta go run and claim this bucket if anybody else does. So that's why the screenshotting thing comes into play. So we talked about recon, we talked about the digital dumpster diving, and we didn't really talk about how we can do all of this together for one big chain. So originally I found this domain, target.com. The first step that we talked about was asset discovery. So I find this staging development site. It's fake, but kind of the pattern that they had. So I did content discovery. I found something that was internal with some keyword afterwards. And then I did a GitHub search for that exact internal file. And it gave me this clue on GitHub that was like, hey, we have this endpoint that has an API. You can do other stuff with it. So I took the API and I typed in the same thing, domain name, internal, the API internal endpoint, and I found a really cool command that had an internal authentication. So they had an authentication that looked for a header. So instead of having you to type in your username and password, they had a header that you put in your request, and it just completely bypasses their login. And for me to be an outsider, that was extremely valuable, because when I sent it this was a stem reboot command, and I got an okay. So that was an indication of something fishy is going on. I messaged these people, I was like, hey, I may have rebooted something on your end, just don't panic, it was me, but I'm going to investigate what this was, which I did more digging, and I did a little bit of, I ripped all the JavaScript files on the login page. So you go to the login page, right click, you go to look at the JavaScript files, and sure enough, there was a bunch of other endpoints that I didn't know about, and I started making requests to those internal endpoints. And one of the things that I found at the end were LDAP usernames that I could have eventually just brute forced for, but that would have taken a long time. Also, we don't know if we could have brute forced any of them. Also, there's the fact that the passwords expire, if the security team's on top of it. But at the end of the day, my goal was to show him impact, that I could do a bunch more, and that also resulted in giving me an almost $5,000 bounty, which was really fun again. Yeah, that was the entire talk. I'll be around until tomorrow. Please keep in touch. If you guys want to reach out to me on any social media, it's always on my Mahamsik. You can reach out to me via email. You can go to hackerone.com/directory, see all the different programs we work with. We're also hiring. If you're looking for a job, especially remote, we're also hiring for a lot of positions. And if you really like this talk, I'm also offering a training at OWASP, the AppSec USA in San Jose, and I'll also be at Hackfest in Canada in October. Again, all the tools that I've talked about, the top four were, the three middle ones were written by me. Directory Research is open source, and the S3 Bucketeer is also written by Tom Dev, which is also available on GitHub. And a big thank you to you guys, the organizers here, ANYCon, for especially Litzas, Tyler, and Mr. and everybody here. Thank you guys for listening to me the entire time I rambled up about my findings. A big thank you to all the HackerOne community members. If you go on Twitter and look for the bug bounty pro tips, and under the hashtag bug bounty tip, you can see a lot of tips that hackers are sharing on a daily basis. A lot of these were driven by reading those. And a big thank you to Zayat, Tom, Dev, Patrick, John, Smigos, Gilbert, and I wanted to end this a little early if there are any questions. I saw a couple of hands go up. Yes.
So do your lazy recon tools integrate with, what was it, Crunchbase for recon?
Not yet.
Okay.
As soon as so this was the base version of it. There's another version coming that has more sources and does more things. Like right now, I'm not looking at Aaron at all. I'm not looking at Crunchbase. It's just solely focused on the domain, that main domain that you give it in. Just all the things that are behind that.
Right.
Super silly question. That last bug bounty was like $5,238.
So that was
it
because
currency conversion.
No, so that one was because I had Zayed helping me on. So HackerOne allows collaboration with programs. So you can invite another researcher to the program and split it. So we split a 10%, I think was what we did. So
Oh,
we
the
took that
percentage
chunk out, but that
remainder.
was like the bonus, the entire thing that I was given as well.
Okay.
Yes.
So, can you take me through a process how you are doing what you're doing? Do you have a target, or are you just reconning a bunch of things, like, and then seeing if you can find passwords, and then you go to the company, or how are
So
you actually like?
I go based on target. So if HackerOne launches a program tomorrow with company X, and the company says, hey, everything you own is in scope, then I do all those things that I talked about on that company. There's also times where I create a list of sites. So my tool that I have, I feed it to another bash script that says, hey, for every target on this list, run this tool and print out all the results for it. So I do that every month for a set of targets to see what new stuff pops up. So I have the companies that I go to on a regular, every month or so, and I also have the new companies that are launching new programs that no one has looked at once I get invited.
So you're doing like a lot of network recon and just all across the board, not just web application. You're doing whatever is exposed, depending
Pretty
on
much,
whatever
yeah.
the scope is.
A lot of it, I think, most of them are web apps. A lot of the things that we do with bug bounties are either web, mobile, IoT. So if I get the chance to get into someone's network, for example, then I stop there. If I get an SSR that allows me to be in their internal corporate VPN, I stop there and I ask them, hey, can I go a step further? Some companies tell me, yeah, go ahead, I want to see how far you can go with this. Some companies tell me, no, please don't touch anything at all because we don't want you causing an issue. Also, it depends on who the company is. And it all comes down to your relationship with that company. So if I'm going to this company with a decent bug almost every month, then there's that trust that they know I'm not trying to be malicious, I'm just trying to prove the impact of this bug that I found. Yes.
I saw in the common GitHub searches for keys, I didn't notice a removed key. Couldn't you put in like a removed key search and then if it finds that Wayback Machine it and see if it's there?
So for GitHub, you can actually look at the commit history, right?
Yeah.
So if it's still there, you can just
Oh,
go to
yeah.
the original wiki. Any other questions?
How do you build a career in bug bounty hunting? Do you like, because I think I've seen like some people start with something like openbugbounty.org and they try to build some kind of like reputation or.
So I actually do not like Open Bug Bounty, just because that invites hackers to hack on organizations that we're not asked to hack. And submitting a vulnerability on that side, whether if it's an success or not, you're still hacking on a company that didn't ask you to do it. Which is going to a bug bounty platform, looking at the companies that are offering a bug bounty program. There's plenty of us out there. But just for HackerOne alone, we have almost 1,000, if not more, companies that are offering bug bounties. You just got to pick your target. So the one that I recommend to a lot of people when they ask me how they get started, the Department of Defense is a really good place to start. They have a bug bounty program. They invite everybody in the world to hack on them. They don't pay for anything, but they have some websites from the early 2000s that are hosted.
HackerOne.
On HackerOne, HackerOne/Department of Defense. There's plenty of companies that are like that. If you want to get paid, there's Yahoo, but Yahoo's been around for 4 years, so it might be harder to find vulnerabilities on there because a lot of people are looking at it because it's paying, right? But at the end of the day, it just comes down to your own investment. For me, it took about 6 to 8 months when I first started 4 years ago, but it wasn't for the cash part of it. It was just that I was going to college not knowing what I wanted to do. And I didn't want a college degree, but I went from business, computer science to business, and then I graduated with computer science eventually. But it was mostly to figure out where I wanted to go with my computer degree. So bug bounties were very, very new 4 years ago, and I liked the idea of hacking, so I got involved with the community. But there's a ton of hackers every month that come out, new hackers that pop out and just find different things. That's the beauty of bug bounties, right? Because everyone has different backgrounds, different skills, and you get different sort of eyes on your bug bounty program. Yes.
Percentage of time, percentage of time for what you're doing. Are you doing more recon as compared to hacking, or is it a good balance, or?
So I go between 3 things. One is recon. The second one is developing my tool when I get tired of hacking. The third one is ripping up an actual application apart. So I talked about the Airbnb stuff. Even though Airbnb had a lot of things in scope, all the websites were in scope, I focused on the main app itself because it was so huge, the payments were great, and there was a lot of rules that I didn't know about. So I spent a ton of time. I think I found like 60, 70 bugs on there. And that's when I started learning a lot more. Nobody was looking at Airbnb because it looks small, but if you actually sign up and go through everything, it's a huge application. And that was when I learned a lot of the stuff that I learned, a lot of the tricks, because people were just like, oh, just one application, I don't want to deal with this. Versus I spend the time and I want to learn and I want to pick up more skills.
Cool, thanks.
Have you done any formal penetration testing and like written any reports for that? And where I'm going with this is, do you have any opinion on whether a report for like that formal context and the reporting you do for this, like where they diverge?
So for the difference between the pen test and the bug bounty to me is, for bug bounties you pay for results. So you're only paying for stuff that they're finding, versus a pen test, it's an entire thing, right? So I've never done a professional pen testing gig. I've done some smaller ones on my own when I just find holes for them and send it to them. But I didn't enjoy writing the pen test reports because you have to put everything you have done in different formats depending on who you're dealing with, right? But versus bug bounties, I have the freedom of looking at this from anywhere in the world without a VPN or any other configurations that I have to do. Anytime, no boss, no reporting to anybody other than myself. And I did this for my entire last year of college, and I made a 6-digit salary just by doing bug bounties because I created my methodology that worked for me. And that's the biggest thing people don't understand. You have to build your own methodology before you become familiar with all these different bugs.
So the methodology helps you out when some large percentage of your targets don't work out, right?
Well, the methodology that I talked about, this one was just my recon methodology, right?
Fair.
But if it's a site that's just an application, it's a web app, it's a different game. Like you focus on one web app's vulnerability type. Example, you want to find cross-site scripting. That's all I focus on. The next thing is you want to find SSRF. It depends on the application. What is it doing? How does it process that data? What kind of data does it process? If it's an image processing site, then there's different URLs you can deal with. There's different file uploads you can do that maybe bypass the file restriction and so forth. So that methodology is completely different, and it's not something that I've completely locked down. It's just I sit down and I look at the app and I'm like, this one looks like it has a bunch of XSS. Let's just look at the XSS for it. Versus I see another site that's okay, they do a lot of good user input, they sanitize user input. Let's look at other things, look at their APIs, maybe they have business logic problems. Yeah.
You said it took you 6 to 8 months when you first started and you were in college and stuff. So, if for example, right now I'm a web developer. I work 40 to 80 hours a week. I want to. It's just a matter of putting in the time, right? You get a HackerOne account. You play around with the website as much as you can, and then you just learn stuff. Is that basically the suggestion?
Yeah, but if you need course material to learn, we also have a website called Hacker 101, numbers 101. So it's pretty much what we call our hacker education site. It walks you through all these different vulnerability types. There's labs for it, there's YouTube videos for it. So if you don't have access to a site that you want to hack on, we give you all the labs, and we create a lot of different scenarios that you can work on as well. But at the end of the day, it's whatever time you put in for yourself is what you're going to get in return. For the 6 to 8 months that I did, I felt my entire upper division courses, because I was going literally to my QA class, pulling out my laptop, and hacking on Yahoo, for example. Then I realized I just want to get out of school because it was getting in the middle of me and my career with bug bounty hunter or pen tester, whatever you want to call it. So I had to just get out of the way. But I was spending, I want to say, 12 to 14-hour days at one point, besides going to school, because I wanted to be in the industry, right? Yeah.
So I get confused when I look at some of these companies and I read the requirements and they're like, test us, but don't inject anything. How can you do that?
Well, depends on how you do it. So for example, you find a SQL injection, you don't have to pull the admin credentials to prove it, right? You can just give it a sleep query. Make it sleep for 5 seconds, you have your proof of concept, send it to the company. If you're going to get a remote command execution, you don't have to read the etc password file or etc shadow file. You can read a random process file or hosting, for example. So that's what they mean. Don't take it too far is what the problem is. A lot of newer hackers, they don't want you to cause downtime, right? So whatever safest path it is for you to show there's a vulnerability should be the ones that you go through. So again, for the injection ones, I tried to do something either like curl my own site so I can see the logs for it, give it a sleep command, whatever that is. But at the end of the day, you want to show your impact because you don't want to just rely on the other. You don't know who the other person on the other end is. and how much we spend to sale.
Should we be, like, if we were gonna get started on this, total green, that sort of thing, should you be, like, protecting your identity in some way? Being better VPN or something like that?
I hacked the DoD with my own home IP address. For 3 weeks, I was waiting for a knock, but they asked me to do it at the end of the day, right? On their policy, they say, hey, this is all the things that we have in scope. As long as you stay within the scope of that engagement, there's no reason to. The only thing that I've had happen to me once was they asked my IP address because I ended up somewhere I shouldn't have ended up, but they want to investigate that, and I'm more than happy to give them all the IPs that I want. So I give my VPS, my own IP, and then I'm investigating. But as long as you're sticking to the rules, there shouldn't be a reason why you want to take your identity, because you can't. On HackerOne, you have to give us your full name. On your tax form, you need to give us your actual data, but on the HackerOne platform itself, you have to give us your real name. Any other questions? Oh, thanks again.